My wife and I had recently moved to her childhood home. It was much larger than our old place, with enough space for not just our 2 cats, but a new kitten we had adopted. This kitten, Rorschach, was a tiny ball of energy eager to explore every nook and cranny of the house. Despite his small size, he was fearless and loved climbing on things and investigating hidden corners. At first, everything was calm. We were settling into the rhythm of life in a bigger house with more space, getting used to the new neighborhood. The house had a cozy, lived-in feel. It was old but solid, with a kind of charm that modern houses just didn't have. But it didn't take long for us to realize that this house had more secrets than we had expected. Rorschach, being the curious kitten he was, became obsessed with one particular room, the office. It was supposed to be my wife's workspace, and we had just set it up for her. There was nothing unusual about it. Yet, one evening, I noticed Rorschach staring into the office, his back arched, his fur standing on end. He looked like he had seen a ghost. His eyes were fixed on something, and there was an unmistakable sense of fear in his stance. I went in to investigate, figuring maybe he had spooked himself on a shadow or something, but the room was empty, and nothing appeared to be out of place. The light was on, so I doubted he could have mistaken anything. Our other cat, Tarer, was lying comfortably in the corner, so I assumed that Rorschach had just gotten spooked by her or maybe some noise. After all, he wasn't quite used to the other cats yet. But a few days later, something even stranger happened. We were giving our older cat, Haagen-Dazs, some relief for her allergies by running hot water in the bathroom. The steam from the shower always helped clear her sinuses. Roxanne, my wife, went to check on her after a while, and when she walked into the bathroom, she found Haagen-Dazs staring intently at the running water. Roxanne called her name, but the cat didn't respond. The sound of the water was likely too loud for her to hear. But when Roxanne reached down to pet her, Haagen-Dazs freaked out. She leaped backward, banging into the wall, like a jack-in-the-box popping out of its box. Roxanne was taken aback. This wasn't like Haagen-Dazs at all. She wasn't a skittish cat by nature, but the steam room had always made her feel calm. But something about that moment had set her off. Roxanne and I didn't think too much of it at the time. Cats, after all, are temperamental, and Haagen-Dazs wasn't exactly known for being the most confident of the bunch. It wasn't until the weeks that followed, though, that I started to feel that something was off in the house. I couldn't put my finger on it, but little things started happening. Lights flickered, sometimes just for a second, but it was enough to make you wonder. A few times, objects that I was sure I'd left in one spot were suddenly moved. It was always small stuff, so easy to dismiss as forgetfulness or simple accidents. One evening, I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard my wife's voice calling me from another room. I went to check on her. "What?" I asked, confused. "You called me," I said. She looked at me, confused. "No, I didn't." We had been living in this house for a few weeks now, so I thought maybe the stress of moving was getting to me. Maybe I had heard something through my headphones. But the voice had been so clear. It had sounded just like her. Around the same time, I started noticing something strange with my action figures. I'm a collector, and I had a shelf full of posable Bionicles scattered around the house. I had left a few of them on the kitchen table, waiting to be placed in a more permanent spot. One morning, as I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. All their heads were turned, staring out the window that faced the cemetery behind the house. I knew for a fact that I hadn't posed them like that the day before. I would never do something like that. And the weird thing was, my wife hadn't moved them either. She would have said something if she had been messing with them. I don't think she even noticed. It was such a small detail, something I could have missed easily, but the fact that they were all facing the same way sent a chill down my spine. I also remembered something else, a small but crucial detail. Our house had central heating and cooling, but the system had been turned off for years, and we had no plans of using it. The vents were open, but after a while, I went around and closed them all. When I did that, the strange occurrences stopped. The flickering lights, the moved objects, the weird feeling in the air, it all seemed to vanish, at least for a while. But then, one night, everything changed. We had been asleep when the sound broke the silence. A terrified yelping from the kitchen. I bolted out of bed, my heart racing in my chest. I rushed to the kitchen, where Haagen-Dazs was screaming at the window, pawing at it in desperation. I stepped outside, hoping to find the source of her terror, but I didn't find anything. It was a quiet night, with no sign of any animals or intruders. I shined my flashlight along the yard, but there was nothing unusual to see, except for the window. When I turned the light on it, the blood in my veins turned to ice. There, on either side of the window, was a dirty handprint. And in the middle of the glass, a crudely drawn happy face, 2 dots for eyes, a jagged line for a mouth. I had no idea what to make of it. Roxanne and I were both terrified. We called the police, but when they came to investigate, they said there were no fingerprints to be found. Whoever had touched the window had worn gloves. They suggested it was just some kids messing around, but there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. Over the next couple of weeks, things only escalated. We began to find the same dirty handprints on our vehicles, on the living room windows. I even tried setting up a phone camera to record through the night, hoping to catch something on film. But when I checked the footage, there was nothing, just empty yards and dark windows. Then, one Saturday night, everything came to a head. We had just begun to drift off to sleep when I heard it, a knock at the back door. But it wasn't just a knock. It was a slap, the sound of something heavy hitting the door. I got up, as quietly as I could, and moved toward the kitchen. Roxanne followed me, her face pale with fear. I put my ear close to the back door, waiting. My breath came out in slow, shallow gasps. The cold air seeping through the door made it feel as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then, another slap. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. It wasn't like any noise I had heard before. It was slow, deliberate, like something or someone was trying to get my attention. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to open the door, confront whatever was out there. But another part of me screamed to stay inside, to lock the door and never open it again. I took a deep breath and slowly, carefully, twisted the doorknob. The door didn't open. It was stuck, as if something was holding it shut from the other side. My pulse quickened. I tugged harder, but it didn't budge. That's when I heard it, the voice. It wasn't just a knock anymore. The voice was there, on the other side of the door. And it sounded wrong. It sounded like my wife's voice, but it was distorted, faint, breathless. "Hello," it whispered, a sound like air escaping through a crack in the door. I stepped back, my mind racing. I looked at Roxanne, and I could see the terror in her eyes. We both knew at that moment that this was no prank. No intruder. This wasn't even a person. The voice came again. This time it was clearer, sharper. "Hello," it said, with a mocking lilt that sent chills down my spine. It sounded like me. It was using my voice. It knocked again, this time in a rhythm I recognized. It was the familiar knock pattern I used to joke around with Roxanne. Knock, knock. It followed it up with, "Shave and a haircut." Knock, 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 knock. The voice was laughing now. A breathless, dry laugh that made my stomach turn. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I couldn't move. My body was frozen with terror. I finally gathered enough strength to slowly reach for the doorknob again. The door was still cold to the touch, and as I opened it, I half expected something to grab me from the other side. But when I stepped outside, there was nothing. The yard was still, quiet. The night was eerily peaceful, save for the rustling of the trees behind the cemetery. And then, as I turned back to the door, I saw it, a handprint, fresh and dirty, on the doorframe. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I had to get back inside. But as I slammed the door shut, a gust of wind hit me. It felt cold, sharper than anything I'd felt before. Roxanne was standing in the living room, her hands on her head, her face stricken with fear. I locked the door, my heart racing. That night, we didn't sleep. And I knew, without a doubt, that something had followed us home.